Seraphina never imagined that finding her mother-in-law's suitcase in their living room would uncover a decades-long conspiracy that destroyed her entire understanding of family loyalty. When Margaret walked through their front door with permanent moving boxes announcing she was moving in indefinitely, something felt wrong beyond the obvious boundary violation. The triumphant smirk on Margaret's face and her wife Elena's guilty expression revealed this was not a sudden decision. 3 generations of carefully orchestrated manipulation were about to unravel in the most devastating way possible. Before we dive into how this family betrayal completely shattered everything Seraphina believed about love and trust, tell me where you are watching from today. If this story already has you questioning your own family dynamics, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge tale will leave you speechless. You will not believe how deep this deception goes and how perfectly karma delivered justice in the end. The morning started like any other Tuesday, until Seraphina returned from her early yoga class to find their pristine living room transformed into a makeshift bedroom. Margaret had somehow acquired a key and was methodically unpacking designer luggage as if she owned the place. The expensive leather suitcases suggested this move was financially motivated rather than emergency-driven. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying coffee, her movements careful and rehearsed. "Seraphina, we need to talk. Mother is going through a difficult transition period and needs somewhere stable to land." Margaret looked up from arranging her collection of crystal figurines on their coffee table. "Seraphina, dear, I hope you do not mind the intrusion. Elena assured me you would understand family obligations." The word obligations hung in the air like a threat. Seraphina had married into this family 2 years ago, constantly feeling like an outsider despite Elena's reassurances. Margaret had always treated her with polite coldness, but this felt different. This felt calculated. "How long exactly is this transition period?" Seraphina asked, watching Margaret claim their space with disturbing confidence. Elena avoided eye contact. "Mother lost her apartment lease unexpectedly. The landlord sold the building to developers. She needs time to find something suitable." Something about this explanation felt rehearsed. Margaret had always boasted about her rent-controlled apartment in the prestigious downtown district. Losing such a valuable lease seemed impossible unless something catastrophic had occurred. Over the following days, Margaret's presence transformed their home dynamic completely. She criticized Seraphina's cooking rearranged furniture without permission and monopolized Elena's attention with endless dramatic stories about her housing crisis. The woman acted like she was doing them a favor by gracing their home with her presence. The first red flag appeared when Seraphina accidentally overheard Margaret on the phone discussing property investments with someone named Gerald. The conversation mentioned liquid assets, market timing, and strategic positioning. This was not the language of someone facing genuine housing insecurity. Elena became increasingly distant, spending long hours at work and avoiding intimate conversations. When Seraphina suggested they discuss boundaries regarding Margaret's extended stay, Elena grew defensive and accused her of being unwelcoming to family. "Your mother has been here 3 weeks, Elena. We agreed on 2 weeks maximum. This is affecting our relationship and our privacy." Elena's response was telling. "Mother is going through tremendous stress right now. The least we can do is provide stability during her transition. I thought you understood the importance of family support." Bestie, sir. The guilt manipulation was masterful, but Seraphina recognized the technique from her psychology training. Someone was coaching Elena to use these specific phrases and emotional pressure points. Margaret's behavior became increasingly entitled. She invited her bridge club friends over without asking permission, used their expensive skincare products, and began receiving mail at their address. When Seraphina discovered Margaret had changed her address with the postal service making their home her official residence, she realized this was not temporary housing assistance. The financial irregularities became impossible to ignore when their household bills suddenly increased dramatically. Margaret claimed she was contributing to expenses, but Seraphina never saw any actual payments. Instead, their joint account showed mysterious withdrawals that Elena explained as necessary household improvements. Elena had always handled their finances independently, claiming expertise from her banking career. Seraphina trusted this arrangement until she noticed their savings account balance had decreased by $15,000 over 6 weeks. When questioned, Elena became evasive and defensive. Those were necessary expenditures for home maintenance and family support. I thought you trusted my financial judgment. Trust was becoming a complicated concept in their household. Seraphina began documenting irregularities, photographing bank statements, and recording conversations. Her instincts suggested something much larger than housing assistance was occurring. Margaret's phone conversations became more frequent and secretive. She would step outside or lock herself in the guest bathroom for extended periods. One evening, Seraphina managed to position herself near the bathroom door during one of these calls. The timeline is perfect, Gerald. She suspects nothing, and Elena is completely compliant. The property transfer can proceed as planned once we establish residency requirements. Property transfer. Residency requirements. These were not the concerns of someone seeking temporary housing assistance. These were the conversations of someone executing a complex financial scheme. The pieces began connecting when Seraphina discovered Elena had been researching property law, specifically regulations regarding common law residency rights and asset protection strategies. The browser history revealed extensive searches about protecting assets from potential divorce proceedings and establishing multiple residence claims. Margaret was not a victim of housing insecurity. She was orchestrating an elaborate fraud designed to establish legal residency in their home while simultaneously positioning herself to claim partial ownership. Elena was not just compliant, she was an active participant in this deception. The betrayal cut deeper than financial fraud. Elena had been lying about their entire relationship foundation while helping her mother steal their shared future. Every intimate conversation, every declaration of love, every promise about building a life together had been contaminated by this underlying deception. Seraphina realized she was not fighting a housing boundary issue. She was confronting a sophisticated scam designed to steal her home, her financial security, and her marriage simultaneously. Margaret and Elena had been planning this betrayal for months, possibly since before their wedding. Armed with evidence of the property transfer scheme, Seraphina decided to confront the conspiracy directly, rather than continue pretending ignorance. The documentation she had gathered painted a clear picture of financial manipulation and residential fraud, but she needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal before taking action. She chose Saturday morning, when Margaret typically attended her bridge club and Elena was running errands. Seraphina used this window to search their home office thoroughly, looking for additional evidence of the conspiracy. What she discovered exceeded her worst suspicions. Hidden in Elena's personal filing cabinet were documents that revealed the true nature of their relationship. Elena had been corresponding with a divorce attorney for 3 months, exploring options for asset protection and spousal support maximization. The attorney's letterhead showed strategic planning for contested divorce proceedings, including recommendations for establishing separate residency claims and protecting inherited assets. But the most devastating discovery was a handwritten letter from Margaret to Elena dated 6 months earlier, before Margaret's supposed housing crisis. The letter outlined their entire strategy in explicit detail. Darling Elena, Gerald's legal advice is sound. Establishing residency in the property before initiating proceedings will protect our family assets and ensure maximum settlement leverage. Seraphina's naive trust makes this strategy particularly viable. The temporary discomfort will secure our long-term financial independence. Elena had been planning divorce proceedings while simultaneously pretending to build their marriage. Margaret's housing emergency was completely fabricated. They had orchestrated this entire scenario to position themselves advantageously for divorce proceedings that Seraphina knew nothing about. The financial documents revealed additional layers of deception. Elena had been systematically moving their joint assets into accounts with Margaret's name as beneficiary. Their shared investment portfolio had been liquidated and transferred to offshore accounts, accessible only to Elena and Margaret. Even their wedding gifts had been cataloged and relocated to storage facilities under Margaret's control. Seraphina photographed everything before returning the documents to their original positions. She needed professional legal advice before confronting these women about their elaborate scheme. The evidence suggested potential criminal fraud charges beyond simple divorce deception. Monday morning, Seraphina contacted Harrison and Associates, a law firm specializing in financial fraud and family law. Attorney Rebecca Harrison agreed to an emergency consultation after reviewing the photographic evidence Seraphina had collected. Mrs. Valdez, what you have documented appears to be systematic asset manipulation with intent to defraud. The residential establishment scheme, combined with undisclosed divorce preparation, could constitute criminal conspiracy charges beyond civil marriage dissolution issues. Rebecca explained that Elena's actions violated multiple fiduciary responsibilities and potentially constituted criminal fraud. The offshore account transfers, combined with the false residency establishment, suggested sophisticated financial crimes rather than simple marital disagreements. We need to act quickly to prevent further asset dissipation. I recommend immediately securing your personal financial accounts and documenting any additional evidence before they realize their scheme has been discovered. Seraphina returned home that afternoon to find Margaret and Elena in the living room reviewing documents that appeared to be property deeds and financial statements. They were so absorbed in their planning that they did not notice her arrival. She positioned herself where she could overhear their conversation. "The residency establishment is proceeding perfectly," Margaret was saying. Gerald confirmed that 6 weeks of documented residence will satisfy the legal requirements. Once that milestone is reached, we can initiate the divorce proceedings with maximum asset protection. Elena nodded, reviewing what appeared to be a financial portfolio summary. The offshore transfers are complete, and Seraphina has not questioned the account balances. She trusts my financial management completely. Margaret laughed coldly. Her naive trust has made this entire process remarkably simple. Some people deserve to learn harsh lessons about placing faith in others. The casual cruelty of their conversation was breathtaking. These women were not just stealing her money, they were deriving genuine pleasure from her emotional manipulation. They had spent months planning her financial and emotional destruction while accepting her love, trust, and hospitality. Seraphina cleared her throat loudly, causing both women to freeze. "Margaret, Elena, we need to have a conversation about property transfers, offshore accounts, and divorce proceedings." Elena's face went white. Margaret attempted to maintain composure, but her hands were shaking as she gathered the documents scattered across the coffee table. "Seraphina, I do not understand what you are suggesting," Elena stammered. "I am suggesting that you and your mother have been planning to divorce me and steal our shared assets for at least 6 months. I am suggesting that Margaret's housing crisis was completely fabricated to establish residency for legal advantages. I am suggesting that you have both committed multiple financial crimes while pretending to love and support me." Margaret stood up, attempting to project authority. "Seraphina, you are clearly emotional and confused. Elena and I were simply reviewing some family financial documents. Your accusations are completely unfounded and frankly insulting." Seraphina pulled out her phone and played a recording of their conversation from moments earlier. Their own voices filled the room, discussing asset protection, divorce timelines, and her naive trust with casual cruelty. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's carefully constructed facade crumbled as she realized the extent of evidence Seraphina possessed. Margaret's confidence evaporated as she understood their entire scheme had been exposed. "How long have you been recording our private conversations?" Margaret demanded, outrage replacing her earlier composure. "How long have you been planning to steal my home and destroy my marriage?" Seraphina countered. "Margaret, you will be leaving this property immediately. Elena, you will be speaking with attorneys very soon about criminal fraud charges and asset recovery." Elena finally found her voice, but her words revealed the depth of her deception. Seraphina, you do not understand the complexity of our financial situation. Mother and I were protecting family assets from potential future complications. Future complications like our marriage, Elena. You were planning divorce proceedings before your mother ever moved in. You have been stealing our money and lying about everything while I believed we were building a life together. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Elena admitted to planning the divorce, but claimed it was necessary for protecting her inheritance from potential financial risks. Margaret defended this scheme as smart financial planning rather than criminal fraud. Both women seemed genuinely surprised that Seraphina viewed their actions as betrayal rather than prudent asset management. The masks had finally fallen completely. Seraphina was looking at two people who had never valued her as anything more than a convenient mark for their sophisticated scam. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation created a Cold War atmosphere in their home. Margaret refused to leave, claiming established residency rights. Elena oscillated between defensive anger and manipulative apologies depending on her assessment of Seraphina's emotional state. Both women seemed convinced they could still control the narrative and minimize the consequences of their exposed scheme. Seraphina realized she was fighting a battle that required professional allies and strategic planning. Rebecca Harrison became her primary advocate, but the complexity of the fraud required additional expertise. The attorney recommended bringing in a forensic accountant to trace the full extent of asset manipulation and a private investigator to document ongoing fraudulent activities. David Chen, the forensic accountant Rebecca recommended, uncovered financial irregularities that extended far beyond what Seraphina had initially discovered. Elena had been systematically diverting funds from their joint accounts for over a year, creating a pattern of theft that predated Margaret's supposed housing crisis by months. Mrs. Valdez, the financial manipulation began almost immediately after your marriage, David explained during their second consultation. Elena established multiple accounts using your social security number and personal information without your knowledge. She has been building a parallel financial structure designed to hide marital assets from potential divorce proceedings. The private investigator Maria Santos provided additional disturbing revelations. Margaret had never lost her apartment lease. She had been subletting the property to generate additional income while living in their home rent-free. The arrangement with her landlord was completely voluntary and financially motivated rather than emergency-driven. Margaret has been running what amounts to a rental scam, Maria reported. She collects rent from subletters while claiming housing insecurity to justify living with you. The woman has 3 different sources of income that she has hidden from you and Elena. But the most shocking discovery came when Maria investigated Margaret's background more thoroughly. Margaret had been married 4 times, and 3 of those marriages had ended in divorce settlements that followed remarkably similar patterns to what she was orchestrating with Elena. This woman has made a career of manipulating family relationships for financial gain, Maria continued. She identifies financially stable couples, establishes herself as a dependent family member, then manipulates one spouse into facilitating asset transfers before engineered relationship breakdowns. Elena was not Margaret's first victim. She was the latest in a decades-long pattern of sophisticated family fraud. Margaret had been grooming Elena for years, probably since before their relationship began to execute this particular scheme. Armed with this information, Seraphina realized she needed to build a broader alliance network to combat such an experienced scammer. Rebecca suggested reaching out to Margaret's previous victims, who might have valuable insights about her methods and potential legal vulnerabilities. The first contact proved immediately fruitful. Patricia Morrison, Margaret's second daughter-in-law, had experienced an almost identical scenario 15 years earlier. Margaret had orchestrated Patricia's divorce from her son Michael, while simultaneously stealing marital assets and claiming financial hardship. Margaret destroyed my marriage and my financial security using exactly the same tactics, Patricia explained during their phone conversation. She convinced Michael that I was financially irresponsible and that protecting family assets required strategic divorce planning. I lost my home, my savings, and my relationship with a man I genuinely loved. Patricia had been fighting Margaret legally for years, but the woman's sophisticated understanding of legal loopholes made prosecution difficult. However, Patricia had documentation that established a clear pattern of repeated fraud across multiple relationships and states. If we combine our evidence and coordinate our legal strategies, we might finally have enough documentation to pursue criminal charges rather than just civil recovery, Patricia suggested. The alliance expanded when Rebecca connected them with Jennifer Walsh, a family law attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases involving elder abuse and family manipulation. Jennifer had been investigating Margaret independently after receiving complaints from multiple sources about her activities. Margaret Torres operates what amounts to a family-based pyramid scheme, Jennifer explained during their strategy meeting. She identifies financially successful individuals, establishes dependency relationships, then manipulates family dynamics to facilitate asset transfers. She has probably defrauded dozens of people over the past 20 years. Jennifer had been building a case against Margaret for months, but needed additional evidence and victim testimony to pursue criminal charges. Seraphina's documentation combined with Patricia's historical evidence provided the foundation for a comprehensive prosecution strategy. The alliance network grew to include Tom Bradley, Margaret's former business partner who had been defrauded in a real estate investment scheme, and Rachel Kim, a social worker who had investigated Margaret for elder abuse allegations involving her own mother's finances. Each ally brought unique expertise and evidence that strengthened their collective case. Tom provided documentation of Margaret's sophisticated understanding of financial law and asset protection strategies. Rachel contributed evidence of Margaret's willingness to exploit even her closest family members for financial gain. But the most valuable ally emerged unexpectedly when Elena's younger sister, Christina, reached out to Seraphina directly. Christina had been estranged from Margaret and Elena for 3 years, following a family dispute that she had never fully explained. After learning about the current situation through mutual friends, Christina decided to share her own experiences with Margaret's manipulation. Margaret has been controlling Elena's financial decisions since our father died 10 years ago, Christina revealed during a tense coffee meeting. Elena inherited substantial assets from Dad's estate, but Margaret convinced her that family financial security required strategic asset protection and relationship management. Christina explained that Margaret had orchestrated Elena's previous relationship breakdowns using similar tactics. Elena's pattern of short-term relationships followed by advantageous separations was not coincidental. It was Margaret's systematic method of generating income through repeated relationship manipulation. Elena is not just participating in fraud against you, Christina continued. She is also a victim of Margaret's long-term psychological and financial abuse. Mother has been conditioning Elena to view relationships as financial transactions rather than emotional partnerships. This revelation complicated Seraphina's understanding of Elena's culpability. While Elena had clearly participated in fraud and deception, she might also be trapped in an abusive relationship with her mother that had distorted her understanding of normal relationship dynamics. Christina offered to testify about Margaret's historical pattern of family manipulation and Elena's psychological conditioning. She also provided financial documentation showing Margaret's control over Elena's inheritance and business decisions dating back years. The alliance was gaining momentum, but Margaret and Elena were not passive targets. They had hired their own attorney, Gerald Morrison, who happened to be Patricia's ex-husband and Margaret's longtime collaborator in these schemes. The discovery that Gerald had been facilitating Margaret's fraudulent activities for decades while simultaneously betraying his own wife, Patricia, added another layer of complexity to the case. Gerald has been helping Margaret execute these schemes while positioning himself to benefit from the resulting asset distributions, Rebecca explained. He represents a direct conflict of interest and potentially criminal conspiracy charges. The battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side, Seraphina had built a network of Margaret's previous victims, legal professionals and financial experts committed to ending decades of sophisticated fraud. On the other side, Margaret, Elena, and Gerald represented a well-established criminal organization with extensive experience manipulating legal systems and family relationships. The alliance decided to coordinate their evidence presentation and legal filings to maximize impact and prevent Margaret from disappearing or destroying additional evidence. They had built a strong foundation, but the most challenging phases of their battle were still ahead. The emotional toll of discovering that her entire marriage had been orchestrated as part of a long-term scam was devastating, but Seraphina found strength in connecting with other survivors of Margaret's manipulation. She was no longer fighting alone against experienced criminals. She was part of a community seeking justice and accountability. Just as the alliance seemed positioned for victory, Seraphina discovered that their carefully coordinated strategy had been compromised from within. The betrayal came from the person she least suspected and trusted most within their support network. Christina had been providing Margaret with detailed information about their legal strategy, evidence collection, and planned timeline for criminal charges. The sister who claimed to be Elena's victim was actually Margaret's most sophisticated accomplice, playing a long-term double-agent role to protect their criminal organization. The discovery happened accidentally when Seraphina arrived early for a meeting with Rebecca and overheard Christina on the phone in the law office parking garage. Christina was providing Margaret with specific details about Patricia's evidence, Tom's financial documentation, and Rachel's social services investigation. "Mother, they have more evidence than we anticipated, but nothing that directly implicates you in criminal conspiracy. The forensic accountant found the offshore accounts, but cannot prove you directed the transfers rather than Elena acting independently." Seraphina recorded the conversation while remaining hidden behind a concrete pillar. Christina continued providing strategic intelligence that could only have come from someone with intimate access to their legal planning. Patricia's documentation is extensive, but focuses on civil recovery rather than criminal charges. If Elena takes full responsibility for the financial transfers and claims psychological manipulation, we can probably limit your exposure to civil liability rather than criminal prosecution. The betrayal was sophisticated and devastating. Christina had been feeding Margaret intelligence while simultaneously encouraging the alliance to pursue more aggressive legal strategies that would ultimately fail. She had positioned herself as Elena's advocate while actually protecting Margaret's interests. When Seraphina confronted Christina directly, the younger woman initially denied the accusations, before eventually admitting her role in protecting Margaret. Her justification revealed the depth of Margaret's psychological control over both daughters. "You do not understand the complexity of our family dynamics," Christina explained with cold calculation. "Margaret has provided for Elena and me our entire lives. Protecting her from legal consequences is not betrayal, it is family loyalty." Christina revealed that Margaret had been supporting her financially for years through a complex trust arrangement. Christina's apparent estrangement from Margaret was actually cover for her role as an intelligence gatherer and strategic advisor. She had been infiltrating Margaret's victims' support networks for years, gathering information to help Margaret avoid prosecution. "Elena genuinely believes she is protecting you by participating in asset transfers," Christina continued. "Margaret convinced her that divorce was inevitable and that strategic financial planning would benefit everyone involved. Elena thinks she is being responsible and caring." The manipulation was even more sophisticated than Seraphina had realized. Margaret had not just orchestrated financial fraud, she had created an entire family culture where deception and exploitation were reframed as love and protection. Both Elena and Christina had been psychologically conditioned to view criminal behavior as family responsibility. The immediate consequence of Christina's betrayal was that Margaret and Gerald knew exactly which evidence the alliance possessed and which legal strategies they were planning. Margaret had been preparing counter-strategies and alternative escape plans based on Christina's intelligence gathering. When Patricia learned about Christina's betrayal, she was devastated but not entirely surprised. Margaret has always been exceptionally skilled at turning family members against each other while positioning herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. The alliance had to completely restructure their legal strategy while operating under the assumption that Margaret knew everything about their previous planning. Rebecca recommended bringing in federal investigators who specialized in financial crimes that crossed state lines, since Margaret's pattern of fraud involved multiple jurisdictions. But the most immediate threat was that Elena had disappeared. Christina revealed that Elena had been moved to a secure location while Margaret's attorneys prepared a legal defense strategy that would portray Elena as a mentally unstable individual who had acted independently without Margaret's knowledge or involvement. Elena is being coached to testify that she orchestrated the financial transfers due to psychological problems and fear of abandonment, Christina admitted. Margaret's attorneys will argue that Elena's actions were symptomatic of untreated mental illness rather than deliberate fraud. This defense strategy would not only protect Margaret from criminal charges but would also position Elena as incompetent to manage her own financial affairs. Margaret would become Elena's legal guardian and gain control over all remaining assets, while Elena faced potential criminal prosecution alone. Seraphina realized that Elena, despite her participation in fraud, was also a victim of systematic psychological abuse that had distorted her understanding of reality. Margaret was prepared to sacrifice her own daughter to avoid legal consequences for her criminal organization. The betrayal within their alliance had revealed the true scope of Margaret's operation. This was not simply financial fraud involving one family. It was a sophisticated criminal organization that had been operating for decades with multiple accomplices and carefully planned escape strategies. David Chen, the forensic accountant, discovered additional concerning evidence when he investigated the financial trail more thoroughly. Margaret had been moving money through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts for years, suggesting ongoing criminal activity beyond just the schemes targeting Seraphina and Elena. Mrs. Valdez, we are dealing with what appears to be a professional criminal organization, rather than opportunistic family fraud, David explained. Margaret has sophisticated financial infrastructure that suggests multiple ongoing schemes and possibly dozens of additional victims. The alliance was facing a much larger and more dangerous adversary than they had initially understood. Margaret was not just a manipulative family member. She was the head of a criminal organization with extensive resources, legal expertise, and a network of accomplices that included her own daughters. Maria Santos, the private investigator, uncovered evidence that Margaret had been planning to disappear completely if legal pressure became too intense. She had established multiple identities, maintained properties in different states, and created financial resources that would allow her to start over in a new location with a new identity. We have a limited window of opportunity before Margaret activates her escape plan, Maria warned. If she disappears, recovering stolen assets becomes almost impossible, and she will likely continue victimizing new families elsewhere. The pressure to act quickly was intensifying, but Christina's betrayal had compromised their ability to coordinate effective legal action. They needed to develop new strategies that Margaret could not anticipate, while simultaneously preventing Elena from becoming a sacrificial victim in Margaret's defense strategy. Rebecca recommended working with federal authorities who had experience prosecuting sophisticated financial crime organizations. The evidence they had collected suggested violations of federal laws regarding wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering that would justify federal prosecution. We need to move beyond state-level family law and pursue this as organized crime, Rebecca advised. Margaret's operation meets the criteria for federal racketeering prosecution, which would provide much stronger legal tools and prevent her from escaping to another jurisdiction. The alliance had been betrayed and their initial strategy compromised, but they had also uncovered evidence of crimes much more serious than they had originally suspected. The battle was far from over, but they were finally understanding the true nature of their opponent and the resources required to achieve justice. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source when FBI Special Agent Sarah Mitchell contacted Rebecca directly about Margaret's criminal organization. The Bureau had been investigating Margaret as part of a larger task force targeting family-based financial fraud rings that operated across multiple states. Margaret Torres has been on our radar for 18 months, Agent Mitchell explained during an emergency meeting with the Alliance members. We have been building a case against her organization, but needed additional evidence and victim testimony to justify federal prosecution. The FBI had been investigating complaints about Margaret from 7 different states, documenting a pattern of sophisticated fraud that extended far beyond what the Alliance had discovered independently. Margaret's criminal organization had been systematically targeting middle-class families for over 2 decades, stealing millions of dollars through orchestrated relationship manipulation. Agent Mitchell brought devastating evidence that validated everything the Alliance had suspected and more. The FBI had financial records showing Margaret's true wealth, which came entirely from decades of defrauding families. She owned properties in 5 states, maintained offshore accounts in 3 countries, and had been living an extremely comfortable lifestyle, funded entirely by stolen assets. Margaret Torres is not a desperate woman seeking housing assistance, Agent Mitchell continued. She is a sophisticated criminal who has made stealing from families her primary source of income for over 20 years. The FBI investigation had also uncovered evidence that Gerald Morrison was not just Margaret's attorney but the financial architect of her criminal organization. Gerald had been helping Margaret execute these schemes while simultaneously representing some of her victims in divorce proceedings, creating massive conflicts of interest and potential obstruction of justice charges. Even more shocking was the revelation that Christina had been working with federal investigators as a confidential informant for 6 months. Her apparent betrayal of the Alliance had actually been part of an FBI operation designed to gather evidence about Margaret's criminal organization while protecting Elena from becoming a fall guy for her mother's crimes. Christina approached us after Elena became involved with Seraphina, Agent Mitchell explained. She realized Margaret was planning to execute her most sophisticated scheme yet and wanted to protect Elena while finally bringing her mother to justice. Christina had been playing an incredibly dangerous double agent role, feeding Margaret false information while providing federal investigators with real intelligence about the criminal organization's operations. Her apparent betrayal of the Alliance had been coordinated with the FBI to prevent Margaret from suspecting federal investigation. The truth about Christina's role was emotionally overwhelming for everyone involved. Patricia apologized tearfully for doubting Christina's motives, while Seraphina struggled to process the revelation that Christina had been protecting Elena throughout the entire ordeal. Elena has been psychologically manipulated since childhood, Christina explained when she could finally reveal her true role. Margaret conditioned both of us to view criminal behavior as family responsibility, but I realized years ago that we were participating in destroying innocent people's lives. Christina had documented Margaret's psychological manipulation techniques, providing federal investigators with evidence of systematic emotional abuse that explained Elena's participation in criminal activities. Elena was not just a willing participant in fraud. She was a victim of long-term psychological conditioning that had distorted her understanding of right and wrong. The FBI had been working to build a case that would prosecute Margaret and Gerald for their leadership roles while treating Elena as a victim who had been psychologically coerced into participating. Christina's intelligence gathering had been essential for understanding how Margaret's organization operated and identifying all the victims across multiple states. Agent Mitchell revealed that the federal investigation had identified 43 families who had been victimized by Margaret's organization over the past 15 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $4 million, making this one of the largest family-based fraud cases the Bureau had ever prosecuted. We have been waiting for the right moment to arrest Margaret and dismantle her entire organization, Agent Mitchell explained. Seraphina's case provided the final evidence we needed to justify federal racketeering charges against the entire network. The federal case would not just recover stolen assets from Seraphina's situation, It would provide restitution for dozens of families who had been victimized over the years. Margaret's accumulated wealth from decades of fraud would be seized and distributed to her victims through federal asset forfeiture proceedings. David Chen's forensic accounting work had been shared with federal investigators months earlier, providing crucial evidence about Margaret's financial infrastructure and money laundering techniques. His documentation of offshore accounts and shell companies had helped the FBI trace stolen assets across international boundaries. Mrs. Valdez, your decision to fight back against this fraud provided the missing piece federal investigators needed to pursue criminal charges. Agent Mitchell continued. Without your evidence and testimony, Margaret would have continued victimizing families indefinitely. The Alliance members learned they had all been contributing to a federal investigation without realizing it. Patricia's historical documentation, Tom's business fraud evidence, and Rachel's social services reports had all been incorporated into the FBI's comprehensive case against Margaret's organization. But the most significant revelation was about Elena's current situation. Rather than being hidden by Margaret's attorneys, Elena had been in federal protective custody for 2 weeks, receiving psychological counseling and legal advice about testifying against her mother's criminal organization. Elena wants to speak with Seraphina, Agent Mitchell explained. She has been receiving therapy to help her understand how Margaret's psychological manipulation affected her decision-making. Elena is prepared to testify against Margaret and Gerald, but she wants to apologize to Seraphina personally first. The reunion between Seraphina and Elena was emotionally complex and painful. Elena had been living in a federal safe house working with psychologists to understand how decades of psychological conditioning had led her to participate in criminal fraud against someone she genuinely loved. Seraphina, I know apologizing cannot undo the betrayal and pain I caused, Elena said through tears during their supervised meeting. Margaret convinced me that protecting family assets was more important than protecting our relationship. I realize now that I was destroying the most important thing in my life, to serve someone who never actually loved me. Elena's psychological evaluation revealed extensive evidence of emotional abuse and manipulation that had begun in childhood. Margaret had systematically isolated Elena from healthy relationships while conditioning her to prioritize financial security over emotional intimacy and ethical behavior. I thought I was being responsible and protecting our future together, Elena continued. Margaret made me believe that marriage was temporary, but family wealth was permanent. She convinced me that strategic divorce planning was an expression of love rather than betrayal. The psychological counseling had helped Elena understand that her entire worldview had been distorted by years of systematic manipulation. She was committed to testifying against Margaret and Gerald while working to understand how to rebuild her capacity for healthy relationships. Federal investigators had recovered most of the assets stolen from Seraphina, but the emotional damage would require time and professional counseling to address. Elena was facing the challenge of reconstructing her identity without Margaret's controlling influence while accepting responsibility for her participation in criminal fraud. The federal case was moving forward rapidly, with Christina and Elena both providing testimony against Margaret's organization. The decades-long criminal enterprise was finally facing justice, and dozens of families would receive restitution for their losses. The federal trial against Margaret Torres and her criminal organization became one of the most significant family fraud prosecutions in recent history. Margaret was convicted on 47 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy charges. Gerald Morrison received 35 federal convictions for his role as the organization's legal architect. Margaret was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, while Gerald received 18 years. The judge specifically noted the sophisticated nature of their crimes and the devastating impact on dozens of families across multiple states. Federal asset forfeiture proceedings recovered over $3.8 million for distribution to victims. Elena pled guilty to conspiracy charges but received probation and community service in recognition of her status as a victim of long-term psychological abuse. The court required her to continue psychological counseling and make full financial restitution to Seraphina as conditions of her plea agreement. Seraphina recovered 94% of her stolen assets through federal restitution proceedings. More importantly, she had gained a deeper understanding of psychological manipulation and the importance of trusting her instincts when relationships feel wrong. The months following the trial were emotionally challenging as Seraphina processed the betrayal while rebuilding her sense of trust in relationships. Therapy helped her understand that Margaret's manipulation had been sophisticated enough to deceive mental health professionals and law enforcement officers. Her failure to recognize the fraud immediately was not a personal weakness. Elena moved out of state to begin rebuilding her life away from Margaret's controlling influence. She maintained no contact with Seraphina, recognizing that her presence would prevent both of them from healing properly. Elena's commitment to psychological recovery was genuine, but the damage to their relationship was irreparable. Christina became an advocate for victims of family financial fraud, working with federal investigators to identify and prosecute similar criminal organizations. Her experience as both a victim and informant provided unique insights that helped law enforcement agencies develop more effective strategies for investigating family-based crimes. Patricia Morrison, who had been fighting Margaret legally for 15 years, finally received substantial restitution through the federal proceedings. She used her recovery to establish a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance and emotional support to victims of family financial fraud. The Alliance members maintained their friendships, having bonded through their shared experience of fighting sophisticated criminals and achieving justice. They had discovered that individual victims fighting alone could be easily defeated, but coordinated resistance could expose and prosecute even the most experienced criminal organizations. Seraphina eventually sold the house that had been contaminated by Margaret and Elena's betrayal, using the proceeds to purchase a smaller property that represented her independent future rather than stolen dreams. She found peace in creating a space that belonged entirely to her, without any association with deception or manipulation. The legal victory provided closure and financial recovery, but the emotional healing required time and professional support. Seraphina learned to appreciate the warning signs she had initially ignored and developed stronger boundaries around trust and financial transparency in relationships. 1 year after the trial, Seraphina received an unexpected letter from Elena, expressing genuine remorse and reporting on her psychological recovery progress. Elena had completed intensive therapy, was working in a social services position, helping other abuse victims, and had developed healthy relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Seraphina, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that destroying our relationship was the greatest mistake of my life, Elena wrote. Margaret taught me to view love as weakness and financial security as the only reliable foundation for life. Therapy has helped me understand that I was wrong about everything that truly matters. Elena's letter included full financial documentation showing that she had paid restitution beyond what was legally required, donating additional money to victims' advocacy organizations. She was genuinely committed to making amends while respecting Seraphina's need for complete separation. Seraphina chose not to respond to Elena's letter, but she kept it as a reminder that people could change when they committed to genuine psychological healing. Elena's transformation did not repair their relationship, but it provided evidence that recovery from psychological manipulation was possible with professional support and personal commitment. 2 years after the trial, Seraphina met Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who had helped coordinate the federal prosecution, for coffee to discuss establishing a legal clinic that specialized in family financial fraud cases. Jennifer had seen increasing numbers of families victimized by sophisticated scams similar to Margaret's organization. Your case changed how federal authorities approach family fraud investigations, Jennifer explained. The coordination between local and federal law enforcement that developed during your situation has become a model for other jurisdictions dealing with similar crimes. Seraphina decided to become involved in victim advocacy, using her experience to help other families recognize and fight financial manipulation. She discovered that sharing her story helped others trust their instincts when relationships felt wrong and encouraged them to seek professional help rather than suffer alone. The nonprofit organization she eventually established provided legal referrals, financial counseling, and emotional support to families dealing with sophisticated fraud schemes. The work gave deeper meaning to her traumatic experience while helping prevent other families from enduring similar betrayals. Margaret Torres died in federal prison 3 years into her sentence, still maintaining that she had been protecting family assets rather than committing crimes. She never expressed remorse for the families she had destroyed or accepted responsibility for decades of systematic fraud. Gerald Morrison was released after serving 12 years, but faced immediate civil lawsuits from additional victims who had discovered his role in their financial losses. His legal license was permanently revoked, and he spent his remaining years working minimum wage jobs while making restitution payments. Seraphina found genuine love again 4 years after the trial with Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a psychologist who specialized in treating victims of financial fraud. Their relationship was built on complete transparency, shared values about honesty, and mutual respect for each other's independence and boundaries. Trust does not mean abandoning good judgment, Amanda often reminded her patients and her partner. Healthy relationships require both emotional intimacy and practical wisdom about protecting yourself from manipulation. Seraphina had learned that love and caution were not mutually exclusive, and that protecting herself financially was not evidence of distrust, but rather evidence of self-respect and practical wisdom. The experience taught her that justice sometimes arrives slowly, but tends to be thorough when it finally comes. Margaret's criminal organization was completely dismantled, dozens of families received restitution, and new legal precedents were established for prosecuting sophisticated family fraud. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you believed about loyalty and trust? Do you think Elena deserved a second chance for genuine psychological recovery? Or was her participation in the fraud unforgivable regardless of Margaret's manipulation? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how families should balance forgiveness with accountability when dealing with financial betrayal. If this story of justice and recovery resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family manipulation. Share this video with anyone who might need encouragement about fighting back against sophisticated fraud. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to justice. And remember that trusting your instincts about wrong relationships can save you from years of manipulation. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we need to protect ourselves from most carefully. But there is always hope for justice and genuine healing when we have the courage to fight for what is right.